Hello, a warm welcome. I'm Felicity Ezewike. Here are the stories making rounds beyond the continent. We'll begin with updates on the U.S. election. Vice President Kamala Harris has been riding high on a wave of favorable polls and energetic rallies since she became the Democratic Party's nominee for president. But beyond the good vibes, where does she stand on the issues that matter to Americans? Last night at the Democratic National Convention was a chance to lay out the policies in a headline speech. For News Central, Afia Hagan reports.
Vice President Kamala Harris capped one of the most extraordinary months in modern political history on Thursday night with a speech that rallied Democrats around themes of patriotism and cast Donald Trump as the enemy of classic American principles. With the cadence of a courtroom prosecutor, Harris delivered on the promise many Democrats saw in her when she launched her first presidential campaign 5 years ago and when Joe Biden chose her as his running mate in 2020.
Our nation with this election has a precious, fleeting opportunity to move past the bitterness, cynicism, and divisive battles of the past, a chance to chart a new way forward. Not as members of any one party or faction, but as Americans.
Harris also delved deeper into her own policy positions, particularly on foreign policy. She said she'd be a president who is realistic, practical and has common sense, a clear rebuttal to former President Donald Trump's effort to brand her as too liberal.
I will be a president who unites us around our highest aspirations, a president who leads and listens, who is realistic, practical, and has common sense, and always fights for the American people.
Before Harris gave her 40-minute speech, we heard from her family, with her goddaughter, niece and stepdaughter taking to the stage to lend their support. Her great-nieces, aided by US actor Kerry Washington, taught the crowd how to properly say Kamala Harris's name.
Everybody over here, say Kama! Everybody over here, say La!
Together! For president!
Reverend Al Sharpton, with 4 of the exonerated 5, formerly known as the Central Park 5, endorsed Harris for president. Pink performed What About Us, and 100,000 balloons were dropped inside the United Centre to celebrate the end of the convention. But after all that feel-good factor, what happens now? Harris is quite fresh to voters, but she has to deal with the next few months of Republicans attacking her at every turn, the potential threat of misinformation, and things that get manipulated online. The next big moment is a live debate against Donald Trump, which will be a very different experience to performing to a receptive audience that you get at a convention. For News Central, I'm Afia Hagan.
Joining us to look at this development is foreign policy expert Bolu Michael-Biyi. Bolu, thank you for joining us. The convention has now ended. How does Kamala Harris' acceptance of the nomination impact the party's electoral strategy, particularly in the battleground states? And what democratic groups are key to her campaign, and how might her policies influence their support?
Well, to be very fair, Kamala Harris' emergence has added a little bit of energy to the Democratic Party campaign for presidency. And being a person of color also is something that would energize a lot of people, especially minority groups and, some young voters as well. And that has been the focus of Kamala Harris' campaign. And I think the people that would broker the election for her, should her plan succeed or go well, are the women, minority population, and also the young voters. We've seen Kamala Harris now on TikTok, trying to appeal to young voters. And I think these demographic people are the people that have policies on healthcare, for example, and let's say climate change and social justice. Some of our policies will resonate with this group of people.
How does her policy platform, as outlined during her acceptance speech, compare to the key issues emphasized by the Democratic Party in previous elections? Are there any significant shifts or continuities in her policy proposals?
Sure, some policies, trajectory in terms of a continuity, and there's some new, some new trends as well in a campaign. For example, when it comes to issues relating to healthcare and climate change, it seems to be consistent with the Democratic Party's principles or strategy, over time. But when it comes to issues that pertains to social justice and economy especially, she seems to have gone a bit further. The Democratic Party traditionally have been quite liberal, but our economic plan seems to be quite, a bit, a bit extreme. Some people consider it might be a bit extreme, that might run the country to a point of socialism or even absolute communism. And that's what is being peddled by the Republican Party and the Trump campaign now, because she laid down certain policies that seems to be quite socialist. And, and she needed to now, she didn't really state exactly how she intends to bring these social economic policies to bear.
I mean, this question I'm about to ask you has been asked repeatedly because of its significance. I want you to share your thoughts as briefly as possible. How does her acceptance of the nomination fit within the broader historical context of women and minorities running for the U.S. presidency?
Whether she wins the election or not, she has put her names in the sands of time, in the annals of history, being the first woman of color to, go that far. Persons like, Jesse Jackson have tried to, get to where she is today without any major success. But persons like President Barack Obama has laid the foundation for her that it is possible, as well as, women like Shirley Chisholm, which was the first Black woman to be elected into the Congress. And so she'll be an inspirational figure, whether she wins or not. And we only hope to see more women in leadership roles, not only in the United States, but globally. So she has done well, and congratulations for her, whether she wins or not. She has showed others that it's possible to go this far.
Hugo, just before we came on for Beyond the Continent, we had a live of the presser by Robert Kennedy Jr. What are your thoughts on his proposed nomination of Donald Trump for presidency?
It's not really much of a surprise, being that he's a business person himself, and he has links to persons like Donald Trump from time. They are both also quite grounded in the state of New York, where President Donald Trump seems to have done a lot, or even from. So, endorsing him is not really a surprise on a personal level. However, a Democrat in endorsing a Republican candidate may hit the Harris camp negatively, because some may begin to contemplate the reason why a Democrat is supporting a Republican. It's not something that is very common, but it does happen. So let's see how it pans out. Hopefully he makes that official, and let's see how it's going to turn the election around, whether positively in favor of Donald Trump.
I'm sorry I have to interject now, but thank you very much for speaking with us. We appreciate the insights you've provided. I'd like us to cut straight. We understand that Robert Kennedy Jr. has now endorsed Donald Trump for presidency. Let's get that live feed and we'll be back.
I tried unsuccessfully to open similar discussions with Vice President Harris. Vice President Harris declined to meet or even to speak with me. Suspending my candidacy is a heart-rending decision for me, but I'm convinced that it's the best hope are ending the Ukraine war and ending the chronic disease epidemic that is eroding our nation's vitality from the inside, and for finally protecting free speech. I feel a moral obligation to use this opportunity to save millions of American children, above all things. In case some of you don't realize how dire the condition is of our children's health and chronic disease in general, I would urge you to view Dr. Carlson's recent interview with Callie Means and his sister, Dr. Casey Means, who is the top graduate of her class at Stanford Medical School. This is an issue that affects all of us far more directly and urgently than any culture war issue and all the other issues that we obsess on and that are tearing apart our country. This is the most important issue. Therefore, it has the potential to bring us together. So let me share a little bit about why I believe it's so urgent. Today, 2/3, we spend more on healthcare than any country on earth, twice what they pay in Europe. And yet we have the worst health outcomes of any nation in the world. We're about 79th in health outcomes behind Costa Rica and Nicaragua and Mongolia and other countries. Nobody has a chronic disease burden like we have. And during the COVID epidemic, we had the highest body count of any country in the world. We had 16% of the COVID deaths, and we only have 4.2% of the world's population. And CDC says that's because we are the sickest people on earth. We have the highest chronic disease rate on earth, and the average American who died.
Robert Kennedy Jr., given reasons why he believes Donald Trump is the best candidate for the presidency. We're on a short break now. When we come back, we have more stories. Do stay with us. Thank you for staying with us. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell said Friday that a time has come for the United States to start cutting interest rates, adding that his confidence has grown that the battle against inflation is on track. U.S. stocks rose on Powell's remarks, with all three major indices on Wall Street up sharply at around 10 a.m. local time in Washington. The annual economic symposium gives Powell a global platform to share the Fed's thinking with financial markets. He had said a few weeks ago that policymakers could cut rates as soon as September if the labor market remained solid and inflation continued to ease. The Fed's benchmark lending rate currently sits at a 23-year high of between 5.25 and 5.50%, cooling demand in the world's largest economy ahead of November's presidential elections, in which inflation and the cost of living have taken a center role.
All told, the healing from pandemic distortions, our efforts to moderate aggregate demand, and the anchoring of expectations have worked together to put inflation on what increasingly appears to be a sustainable path to our 2% objective. Disinflation while preserving labor market strength is only possible with anchored inflation expectations, which reflect the public's confidence that the central bank will bring about 2% inflation over time. That confidence has been built over decades and reinforced by our actions. With an appropriate dialing back of policy restraint, there is good reason to think that the economy will get back to 2% inflation while maintaining a strong labor market. The current level of our policy rate gives us ample room to respond to any risks we may face, including the risk of unwelcome further weakening in labor market conditions. 4.5 years after COVID-19's arrival, the worst of the pandemic-related economic distortions are fading. Inflation has declined significantly. The labor market is no longer overheated, and conditions are now less tight than those that prevailed before the pandemic. Supply constraints have normalized, and the balance of risks.
Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi used his first visit to Kyiv on Friday to again call for a diplomatic solution to more than 2 years of war with Russia, saying he stood firmly for peace in talks with President Volodymyr Zelensky. Modi was in Kyiv just over a month after angering Ukraine by hugging President Vladimir Putin during a meeting in Moscow. Arriving for talks on Friday, he embraced Zelensky and the pair held a minute of silence at a memorial commemorating children killed in Russia's invasion. New Delhi, which has avoided explicit condemnation of Moscow's invasion, has cast itself as a possible peacemaker between the warring neighbors.
За підтримку Індії нашого суверенітету і територіальної цілісності. І впродовж цих 2,5 років я хочу подякувати особисто прем'єр-міністру Моді і народу Індії за те, що вони підтримали 4 документи в цей історичний візит прем'єр-міністра Моді між Україною і Індією. Це медична сфера, це співпраця в аграрному напрямку, це гуманітарні відносини, це культура. І підготовлена спільна заява за змістом візиту прем'єр-міністра і щодо розбудови стратегічного партнерства між нашими країнами, торгівлі між нашими країнами та військово-технічна співпраця. Все це має.
Thousands of Ukrainian refugees face eviction from shelters in Hungary after a legislative change that came into effect on Wednesday took away their access to state-subsidized accommodation. Nationalist Prime Minister Viktor Orban signed a decree in June limiting state supports to refugees from parts of Ukraine which are not considered affected by the country's war with Russia. Budapest currently lists only 13, or about half of Ukraine's regions, as impacted by Russia's invasion. In Corks, north of Budapest, around 120 refugees were ousted from a guest house under police supervision on Wednesday.
Befedve, hát az ivatarok ennyi idő alatt, ilyen hosszú idő alatt romba döntötték a házamat, és akik otthon maradtak, felhasználták tűzifának, csak a 4 fal maradt, de én nem mehetek a 4 falba haza. Nem engedélyezik, hogy maradjak a lányommal, a lányomat hiába elfogadták, nem maradhat meg, 2 kisgyerek van, akármilyen probléma van, nem tud sehová menni, és muszáj neki is csomagolni és jönni velem el.
Nem tudjuk, csak azt tudjuk, hogy Orbán Viktor nem vállalja a kárpátaljasiakot. Többet mi se tudunk. Nem tudunk.
És itt hova megyünk? Megfognak, kimegyünk, elvisznek, azt akkor ott lelőnek, azt akkor család itt marad magához. Így van, senki nem mer otthon járkálni. Hagynak egy páran otthon, de azt még azok sem mernek járkálni.
UN Chief Antonio Guterres warned Thursday that some Pacific territories face annihilation from climate-induced cyclones, ocean heat waves and rising sea levels. On a visit to Samoa, he said the fate of Pacific Islands depended on limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. Nearly 200 nations agreed to strive for that target in the 2015 Paris Climate Agreement, but UN estimates indicate that the world is not on track to achieve it.
During my visit, I've spent time with communities threatened by the rising ocean. High and rising sea levels pose an enormous threat to Samoa, to the Pacific, and to other small island developing states. And these challenges demand resolute international action. The climate crisis is the gravest threat facing this country and this region, and quite possibly the world. This region, the Pacific, contributes 0.02% of global emissions. Yet, you are on the front lines of the climate crisis, dealing with extreme weather events from raging tropical cyclones to record ocean heat waves. Sea levels are rising even faster than the global average, posing an existential threat to millions of Pacific islanders. People are suffering, economies are being shattered, and the entire territories face annihilation. The Pacific is best managed by Pacific islanders. It must never become a forum for geostrategic.
That's all we have at this hour. Do please send your eyewitness report to the number showing now on your screen. You can also do that by following us on social media at News Central TV. You can watch News Central live on DSTV channel 422, Star Times channel 274, Apple TV and on YouTube. As always, thank you very much for watching. I'll see you much later.